Good. Okay. How are we doing so far?
Taking it all in.
Okay. Just want to make sure. Um, so at the strategy horizon, we're looking for feedback. We're looking for how do we adopt our agile principles at this level. And in terms of feedback and learning, um, we're just at the strategy level. We're trying to determine which initiatives need to be resourced and need to be initiated. So we want just enough information to make those decisions. Um, to say is this a project that is worth undertaking? Specific questions to ask in terms of in terms of whether or not we want to deal with specific initiatives. Is there a need to satisfy? Do we know that an initiative that we're considering is going to respond to something that we need to change in the organization? Um, is it aligned to the organization's strategic objectives? Based on our high level goals for the business, is can we map this particular initiative that we're considering, this particular project, to one of our strategic goals so that we can say we are aligned organizationally? Is it worth satisfying the need? If we've identified a need, we have to account for, okay, if we're going to initiate a project and we're going to expend resources on that project, we want to have some sort of return. We want to be able to look at that and say, are we spending our resources wisely? Do we have the resources available to spend for this? And balancing that against what we're gonna get back from this. And this is it can also again be a little bit, I want to say, gray and fuzzy, because sometimes it's hard to attach numbers or specific numbers, specific measures to things. Sometimes we have to consider things that are a little bit more amorphous. Um, One of the things that comes to mind right now is if we determine that for whatever reason our workforce or a section of our workforce is unhappy with what's going on. They're not feeling as productive as they could feel. They're just feeling that things are not the way they would like for them to be. At some point, the organization may say, this is not good for us because overall our productivity is going down. There's not something that we can directly attribute numbers to, but we can see that there's something that's going on here where people are not comfortable for whatever reason, and we might want to undertake a project that says we're going to improve our employees' morale. We don't know how much that's going to improve our productivity as an organization, but we have a feeling that it is going to improve our productivity. We can't measure how much, and we may not even want to measure how much our productivity is going to increase by making our employees happier, but we've decided that we have an organizational goal to make our employees more happy and more satisfied. So things get incredibly, or they can get incredibly complex at the strategy level, because sometimes things are not directly attributable. And as strategic analysts, or as people who are doing strategic analysis, we've got to factor in all of those things and say, okay, our goal is to determine how we're going to allocate our resources. So those decisions come into play. Um, is there a right team? Do we as an organization have the capability to to execute any particular initiative that we're considering? And this again is not necessarily a clear decision in some cases, because sometimes we will decide that an initiative is worth pursuing, but that we don't currently have the resources available or the capabilities available in our organization to successfully achieve, to successfully complete this initiative. That doesn't mean we should necessarily stop considering this initiative. We may just have to consider how we're going to execute the initiative. Can we obtain the right resources? Um, is this the kind of thing where we need to do a certain amount of development? We know what we want to develop, but we don't have the resources. Can we outsource this? Can we hire somebody else to do this for us? Expend our financial resources in order to get the resources that we need in order to successfully execute this initiative. So again, there's a there's a question of do we have the right team available in order to execute this initiative? Can we measure success? This is one of my hobby horses because I feel like all too often we're not really good at making those or defining those measurements. It comes it makes an appearance very often as I'll know it when I see it, or we'll know how well we did after we do it. Those kinds of things are troubling. I find them from an analyst perspective troubling because we need to know how well we're doing our jobs, and if we don't know what our targets and goals are, if we don't know how we're going to measure how well we're doing, then we're going to be hard pressed to say whether or not we're doing well. Um, I always used to say that in terms of a project, from the analysis perspective, the two critical questions that need to be answered is how how will we know when we're done, and how will we determine whether or not we've been a success? And all too frequently, those questions weren't adequately answered, and therefore it put projects at risk because we wouldn't know whether or not we needed to continue working on the project, to continue to do more work on the project, and we didn't have the downstream view that says once we've implemented this project, we need to go back and determine whether or not the project was a success, which means we need to be monitoring downstream. All too often in the project environment, and particularly when you're working on the IT side, it's like, well, that's somebody else's job. We don't, they asked us to build them a tool. We built them a tool onto the next project. And the organization never really came around to, okay, well, was this tool successful? Was this specific initiative successful? If it wasn't, why wasn't it? What kinds of things could we have done to make it more successful? Those questions were not being asked and answered, and that's a whole part of the organizational strategy is if we're not doing those kinds of measurements, if we're not paying attention to it, and just going on to the next project or the next initiative, I think we're doing the organization a disservice. So that's all stuff that needs to be done at the strategy level. So, how do we apply our principles of agile business analysis to the strategic level? Okay. And this is the kind of thing that I mentioned earlier, that is going to be something that you're going to need to focus on because the idea is that the principles do apply at each different level, and you need to be able to differentiate them. I would say that you're probably certain to see on the exam questions that relate to how the principles apply at the different horizons, and this can be an area where you could run into trouble on the exam, in that if they're asking how this specific principle applies at a specific horizon, um, the information in the question and the information in the answers to the question may indicate a valid use for a valid application for the principle, but it may not be the application of that principle at the particular horizon that you're talking about. So you want to spend some time, significant amount of time, understanding the how the principles apply at the different horizons. Okay. So see the whole. This you would like to think that at the strategy level, this is really kind of a key, because we should be looking at things from the perspective of the high level, the high level of the organization, and so this should be relatively straightforward, in that we're looking at a macro level. We're looking at the environment. We're looking at the political environment. There's an analysis technique called PESTLE, PESTLE, which is an acronym, and it encompasses a political environment, economical, legal, technological, and these are the high level things that need to be looked at a strategic level by an organization in order to make intelligent decisions about um, tactics, or about initiatives that need to be implemented. Be realistic. That's in terms of assessing your organization. This is another kind of key. We want to be able to understand where we are right now, our current capabilities of the organization, and we want to be looking at, okay, do we need to improve or increase our capabilities? Can we improve or increase our capabilities? Um, you know, as an organization, what are the things that we do well? Um, what are the things that we don't do well internally? Um, and this is interestingly bleeds into another technique, which is SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Um, strengths strengths are the internal capabilities of the organization. The external manifestation of that would be opportunities. Are there things in the environment that we can do, that we can take on, that will improve our performance? On the other side, challenges internally. What are the things that we don't do as well as we possibly could do? Where are the areas that we might want to improve our capabilities? And the external manifestation of that would be threats. Do we have competitors who are going to be trying to basically capture market share from us? Are there things in the external environment, the political environment, or the economic environment that are going to make it that are going to present problems to us that we're going to have to deal with? So at the strategy level, those are the kinds of things that we need to be looking at and thinking about. Think as a customer. Okay. We've talked, we've talked specifically about value, and we've talked about customer value. And at the strategic level, again, we're in the high level view of things, but we still always want to be thinking about the people who are using our services or buying our products on a macro level. we need to be, our strategy needs to be focused around the value that we're providing to the people who are using our services or our products. Get real using examples. I will admit to personally the get real using examples was really problematic for me in terms of Agile and the IIBA perspective on Agile. I still struggle with this on kind of a daily basis, thinking about get real using examples. It's just my own personal bias. Um, but get real using examples, it's about evidence-based information. So we want to be looking realistically at what's going on, factually what's going on. We want to be basing decisions, particularly at the strategic level, more based on reality and less based on feeling. This is another area where a lot of people who do strategic analysis, who are at that strategic level um, of an organization, somehow seem to think or feel that they know inherently what the right thing is. The CIO that I worked with in the healthcare organization was very fond of saying, "We know what they need." This has been kind of the bane of many development organizations' existence for a long time, where the IT people feel like they know how the business is supposed to operate, and therefore they go forth and build things based on their impressions of the way the business is supposed to operate, as opposed to engaging the business people to tell them how the business operates and making their decisions based on that level. So you can see that in terms of the strategy horizon, what I'm talking about is the strategy for an IT department, and that's equally valid to the strategy of an organization. So even at a lower level, at a more refined or a more detailed level piece of an organization, that piece of the organization also needs to have a strategy right down to in my environment, I needed to have a strategy for my BA team, how my BA team was going to function in the context of the development environment that we were functioning as a part of, and the IT organization obviously had to have a strategy as to how they were going to function as a part of the business. So at each level, there is a strategic component that needs to be considered. And the get real using examples focuses on what is the evidence, what facts and what pieces of information do we have that can help us to inform our decisions. Uh, Identifying new changes that impact planning assumptions is about, again, monitoring what's going on in the environment, monitoring what's happening both internally and externally, and then applying that back to decisions that have been made or decisions that are being considered. Uh, Basing decisions on effective analysis of most current and reliable information. This is a key in that one of the biggest pitfalls that a lot of organizations face is making decisions based on erroneous information. Uh, Erroneous information or lack of information. Um, this is something that a lot of organizations suffer from, and if we focus on using examples, examples should always be factually based, and therefore, if we focus on using examples to inform our decisions, the likelihood is that we are going to be looking at more current and certainly more reliable information. Understand what is doable. Yep. Um, over the previous principles we talked about at the strategic level, understanding who your organization is, what your organization does, what capabilities you have, what resources you have. Um, those that information needs to factor into your decision making process. Um, it's nice to say we should be doing this, we should be doing these things, but before we commit to doing these things and starting to expend resources on doing things, we need to understand whether we have the capability to succeed at what we're doing. And that's the application of the principle of understand what is doable. Stimulate collaboration and continuous improvement. This is about organizational culture. An agile environment is, um, it really is something that has to permeate the entire organization. It really is a cultural thing. Um, you too many organizations try to implement agile at the development level. Um, we want to be, the IT department says, let's all be agile. That means we can do things in short, in short iterations. We can implement all of the agile kinds of things that we all know about, and nobody ever goes back to the strategic level of the organization, the overall organizational culture, and says, can we do this? Because it does require a commitment and a change on the part of the entire organization. Um, you know, it just if you don't have the understanding and the buy-in from all sides and all aspects of the organization, at some level you're going to run into a problem. Um, I mentioned earlier the DSDM, Dynamic Systems Development Methodology, which seeks to merge the idea of Agile's flexibility and Agile's breaking things down into smaller chunks, but it understands that at the organizational level, there still is a feeling that the predictive models, the project management type model is still valid and valuable, and that particular methodology says we need to be operating in this kind of cultural environment that allows us to retain some of the things that we did under the more predictive ways of doing things and mesh them with the agile thing. This is actually looking at the culture of the organization and saying this makes sense for us. We can't just merely, as a development organization, go off and say we're going to be agile when agile requires a commitment from the people on the business side that those people need to understand and embrace in order for us to be successful. So at the strategic level, to be agile, we need to develop the culture of this is the way we do things now. It's different from the way we've been doing things all along, and um, if we want to be successful, we have to embrace that. Avoid waste. Yeah, waste is a big, um, it's a big thing that comes up in the whole agile environment. The overview, when you look at the Agile Manifesto, a lot of what the manifesto was about was trying to eliminate waste, saying there are things that we're doing that are not necessarily helping us to perform our activities better or to be more successful. And if we want to be more successful, one of the things that we have to look at is identifying those things and basically eliminating those things. So, avoiding waste, ensuring decisions on current and accurate information, and a shared understanding of the organization's goals and priorities. This is basically reiterating a lot of what was said under the other principles. Current and accurate information supported by get real using examples. This is what this is saying is by using those examples, using that solid basis, factual basis for information, we're going to be making better decisions. We're going to be making decisions that are not going to result in having to go back and readdress and basically redo work that we did before. Um, Understanding the organization's goals and priorities. Again, if we don't know where we're going, it's a little bit difficult to determine how to get there. And this permeates the entire organization. Uh, this again goes back to my hobby horses of the people at the strategic level communicating down to the level of the people who are actually implementing things as to why these things are being done, because frequently decisions need to be made as to which path, which choices to make, and if the people who are making those decisions at the lower implementation level don't understand what the goal is, don't understand what we're trying to accomplish, then there's a risk that they will make the wrong decision. It may appear logical or reasonable or even a good thing to them, but if it doesn't mesh with the organization's goals, then ultimately we have a problem. Waste happens when we have bad information. When we don't have the right information, there's a real possibility that the choice that we make will not be a good thing. Um, if we don't know what's going on in the organization, if we don't know what's going on around us, we may develop great solutions that don't work together. I've seen this in several instances where, on a practical level, there are solutions that are being developed, and the solutions are system specific, and nobody has accommodated the idea that these solutions need to work together in order to be able to have a successful outcome. I'm diving into more details that are down under the strategic level. Just to give you an example, where you have systems that need to interoperate, and nobody has taken into account the interfaces between those systems. The people that are supporting the systems on either side are making decisions and implementing things based solely on their own needs and their own capabilities and their own impressions of what needs to be done, and nobody has taken into account that, oh, by the way, these systems need to communicate. So if the upstream people are not producing the right output in order for the downstream system to work, we have a problem. The same thing is true at an organizational level. If the upstream and downstream people are not communicating, then we're going to have people making decisions based solely on their own impressions, their own information, and sometimes those decisions will not align, and you will come to a point where you have a roadblock because the decisions that were made were not being made in an informed environment. And that obviously creates problems. Interesting point here is that um, organizations will frequently um, engage in what some people have fondly referred to as death march projects, where we've committed to this and ergo we have to follow it through to its conclusion. In the agile environment, the idea is if we keep our eyes open and we keep watching where we're going, if at some point we see that where we're going is not where we need to go, then why should we keep going down that road? We're better advised to say, you know what, we need to cut our losses here. We need to accept the fact that somewhere along the line something changed, which it may be something that is completely out of our control. It could also be the case that we made a bad choice somewhere and we need to own up to having made that bad choice and say, you know, I'm not gonna force this through to prove that I was somehow right. I need to accept the fact that I could have made the wrong decision, and the best thing for me and the organization is to recognize that fact and say, let's stop doing what we were doing, and basically regroup and say, how do we change things to make things better? Uh, Again, on waste, if we're mindful of the concept of waste, then we do want to be providing current factual information, not hiding things, not trying to cover things up, not trying to reinterpret things, but being objective about it and saying, okay, if we all deal from factual information, um, current and accurate factual information, then we should be able to make appropriate decisions about what we're doing. And ultimately, we will be choosing to support the right initiatives, choosing to do things that will continue to provide value to the organization. That's the end of the slides for the strategy section, and I'm going to drop off from the slides and actually go into the to the study guide here, because one of the things that the study guide does um, that is not really covered in the slides is that it talks about specifically some of the techniques, the agile techniques that apply at these horizons. There are really in the Agile extension, they talk about, and this I will admit is a little bit gray and fuzzy, both in the study guide and in the Agile extension itself, because the extension identifies techniques, specific Agile techniques that apply at a horizon, and it also identifies standard techniques or techniques that are included in the Babcock that the extension feels would apply at specific horizons, but it doesn't do a really great job of drilling into all of those things. If you look at the Agile extension, it seems to me for the strategy horizon, they probably detail 15 or so different of the 24 agile techniques. They probably identify 10 or 15 of them that would be potentially valid at the strategy horizon, and they probably identify another 15 or 20 techniques that come from the Babcock that could apply at the strategy horizon, but they don't go into the detail of how those techniques, either the agile techniques or the Babcock techniques, really apply beyond just saying this is how this technique would apply. So that's it's a little bit gray and fuzzy area for me. In both the study guide and the and the agile extension. I'm saying that, but I will also say that the examination also does not drill into those the specific details of those techniques. It's more about understanding that at this horizon, this is what we're trying to accomplish, and this technique may help you. You don't need to necessarily know the details of how to apply that technique at the area or at that horizon, but just understanding that overall it could apply at this horizon. So what I want to do is to actually look at what's covered in the study guide here in terms of the techniques that might be applicable. Before I do that, any questions, comments, concerns, thoughts about what we just covered? No?
No.
Okay. Either I'm doing a really good job or I'm doing a really bad job. I'm hoping that I'm doing a really good job at this and that it's making sense to you and that this is starting to permeate. I said at the outset I don't think that this is magical or um, particularly complicated to assimilate, and certainly with any level of background in doing analysis or being exposed to analysis, it's pretty straightforward, I think. So, um,
So I also think so.
yep.
For me, I like listening. I like listening a lot because I know after all of this, I still have to go and read. So the training basically gives me a very good overview,
Hmm.
the extent of detail and things I should put in scope of my study.
Yep.
This is one of the things I can derive from what you're saying and also benefit from your own experience practicing all of these too. So that's really what it is for me because
Okay.
I know I still have to go and read the study materials for the exam.
Yep. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah, this is not a this is not the kind of environment like similar to if you've done CSM training, Certified Scrum Master, where they kind of force feed you everything specifically that you're going to need to know in order to pass the exam. Almost down to giving you the actual questions that are going to be on the exam. That was my experience with CSM training, which is why I didn't think CSM was a very worthwhile certification to have. It just seemed like, the goal of CSM training was to generate money for the people who were providing CSM training and basically populate the world with CSM so they could say they have a really great valid certification. This is the kind of training and the way I look at it as this is designed to give you the background and help you to be able to do your job better, basically, is what it comes down to. So that's my goal as a trainer in this environment is to um, not just teach you the factual stuff about this, but also to try and say, how do I apply this so that I can actually do my job, um, so that it makes sense, so that I can do my job better. So that having been said, in the study guide, there are a number of techniques that we should take a look at, and this is just not to give you specific detail on how to execute these techniques. It's just so that you have a conceptual understanding and maybe a little bit of a practical understanding of what these techniques are about. Okay. So. Visioning. The whole idea of visioning is so that we can have a good overview of um, what we're trying to achieve and accomplish. This is where we get a picture of an initiative that at the strategic level we've made a choice to undertake. Um, we've determined that this particular project, this particular product or solution will support our strategic goals. And the visioning exercise is that we need to have a concise statement of what we're trying to achieve so that everybody that is involved um, in the initiative will have something to basically grab onto and say, if all else fails, I know this is what we're trying to accomplish. Okay. It's about creating a shared understanding. Actually, let me see if this will work. Yes. Okay. And there we go. We're trying to create a shared understanding, um, visioning, working towards a vision, and any initiative that we're trying to do will be looking to deliver value. Okay. Oh, that's not going to work. Okay. It doesn't work as I move the screen around. Okay. So we'll just skip the highlights. In terms of and these are things that you want to pay attention to. You know, some of this stuff is likely to appear on the exam, but how much you need to know about it, how far into it you need to be is a little bit up for grabs. I don't recall seeing a lot of this detail in the exam, but on the other hand, as I think about the training, as I think about understanding the whole agile paradigm as the IIBA puts it forth. These things were things that I thought, oh yeah, I should make notes of these. These are the kinds of things that that I actually am working on putting on flashcards, so that for study materials, you could focus on, for each technique, understanding a bit, certainly the purpose for the technique. You may well see these in detail on the exam. You might see a question that says basically the purpose of this technique is to determine the desired outcome for an initiative worded in a concise and approachable manner, and your choices would be a variety of things, including visioning. So you really want to be sure that you're very clear on the purposes of these techniques. The descriptive information, a little less so in terms of the exam. It's really yeah, I don't think you're going to see much that comes out of the descriptions verbatim. It's just overall information. Um, the elements, these are the things that go into creating a good vision from the IIBA's perspective, a vision statement, the vision exercise, and impact metrics. These things I know specifically you'll see that impact metrics are included in the glossary, so you really you can you know um, you probably will see certain of these terms included in the exam, so you should know what the definitions of most of these things are. Um, the strengths, strengths and limitations, more practical information for you in terms of implementing these things in your own environment. Just be aware of um, the potential strengths of these techniques. Um, it's you know I'm just looking at these things and I'm trying to avoid just reading them. But I think that these are pretty concise statements that will help you to understand how to implement these things, how to do them. Um, I think visioning is an interesting place to start because it goes back to my whole concept that this is a thing that a lot of organizations don't don't do very well, and it's interesting that it's the first technique that was listed under the strategy horizon, and it is actually where you need to start. The strategy horizon is where the vision for your initiatives should be coming from, and it's really the core of everything that goes on after it. So it is about creating a shared understanding. So it is about aligning people and getting people motivated, um, giving them something to hang on to, giving them something to buy into. Um, at this level, again, we don't want to go into too much detail, but we do want to have a picture of. Oh, ha. Can you guys hear me now? Am I back?
Now you're good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, okay. Yeah, because it said I dropped my audio connection and then it said it was restored, but I needed to get some confirmation from you guys. So anyway, in terms of visioning, although we don't want to go down into the nitty-gritty details of what's in and out of an initiative, we do want to specify or do want to be able to kind of understand at a high level what's in and out of scope for our initiative. Okay. Um, Visioning is about establishing value, establishing what is going to produce value, so that the entire team knows that and also can basically focus on that. And interestingly enough, if you have a good, solid, concise vision for what your initiative is about, you can assess how well you've achieved that vision, ergo make an informed decision about whether or not the initiative has been a success and whether or not you should continue to work on it. Like everything else, there are some limitations to all of these techniques. And you need to be cognizant or aware of those. Um, this one, I love this idea of treating it as a check the box activity. I think that's the kind of circumstance where people and teams don't understand what you're really trying to achieve. Nobody has really said to them that the vision needs to be something that drives the initiative, that we measure the initiative against. And so teams say, well, we need a vision statement. And everybody sits down and says, "Oh, wow, let's do a big brainstorming session. Let's do a big exercise to get our vision statement." And we put together this wonderful vision statement that everybody says, "Wow, that's really cool. We did a really great job." And then we file it away, and nobody ever looks at it again because they say, "Well, we did our vision statement. We're done." Um, there is a tendency for that kind of thing to happen, particularly because the vision statement is at a higher level. It is something that you can't necessarily directly measure things against. You really have to start to ask questions about it. When you say, "Have we achieved our vision?" It may not be always so clear, and so there's a tendency for teams to just put it away and say, "Nope, we've got our vision statement. We don't have to worry about it." Um, Specifically, actually mirrored by this next bullet, which says it's no use if nobody uses it. And I love the limitations because they're things that certainly I have seen or experienced many times in the course of my career. And I even suffer from occasionally, or probably on a regular basis, from myself, where people get focused in on one idea and say this is the way we need to do things, and we're not really looking at things and saying, are we getting it right? Are we doing it right? I've made this decision, and I will look for information that supports the decision that I've made, as opposed to looking for information and then asking if that information supports the decision I've made. Um, yeah, if you have an interactive team, if you have a team that's interested, if you have a team that is really involved in things, you can come up with a good vision statement. If you have a team that is basically want to do everything the way we've done it before, or doesn't really see the value in looking for a vision for an initiative, then visioning is not going to be terribly successful. And the final one is using visioning as a way of basically defining a solution as opposed to exploring options. So much for visioning. Product roadmap. Have either of you guys seen or developed product roadmaps? I think Atoma may say yes, having been a product person.
Yeah, I've seen the product roadmap. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I would have expected you to say yes. Yeah, product roadmaps are really an interesting kind of thing. The the project that I was working for the wind turbine company, developed a nice product roadmap, and it was being very successful in driving the project forward. I can remember several years ago seeing product roadmap. I think it was from OpenText actually. I don't know if you guys are familiar with OpenText, but it's a big uh, it's a big platform kind of thing, and I was always interested because I saw their product roadmap, and at the time it was enlightening to me because they had this. It was one slide PowerPoint presentation that basically had a bunch of bullets on it, and the bullets were bucketed into, this is what we delivered in our current release, this is what we're working on for our next release, and these are the things that we're considering for future releases. And I thought, wow, this makes an incredible amount of sense when you think about it. Um, you can do these things, and we'll see an example of this a little bit longer term of putting it together for the long haul. The roadmap that they had created was basically a high level roadmap for maybe a little tighter time frame. Um, a good overall product roadmap will look like this is the entire product that we see being delivered, and this is the sequence that we are currently intending on delivering the pieces of that product. Um, but anything that distills things down into that higher level, that gives somebody an overall picture of what's going on with a product or an initiative is, I think, really valuable. It's just, like I said, the presentation that I saw was basically one slide that encompassed a whole raft of information that was very easy to consume for anybody who wanted to take the time to even look at it. So it's a valuable kind of thing for an organization, possibly more so than for a project. I, but even at the project level, the project team would be nice for them to have a concise visual that says, okay, this is everything that we're doing, and this is the plan for when we're going to be doing this. So, um, communicating direction and progress towards the vision. Yep, measures progress against that vision, and we'll talk about this a little bit further because there's a potential downside to that, but that's just really a misinterpretation of what the project roadmap is intended to deliver. So it really covers looking at the features and what's going to be delivered as a part of a product. Again, at a higher level, it's not a lot of a lot of intense detail about things. It's really getting back to the overall level of high level features that are being delivered. If you're taking the time, or if you're put into a situation of being too detailed in your product roadmap, you're going to spend a lot of time with it, and it's going to be, to a certain extent, less valuable. This really is a broader picture of what's going on with your product and your delivery. Here's a simple example of a product roadmap. This is based on a 1 year, 1 year output for the roadmap, and you could make these basically rolling so that you could have the next 4 quarters in a roadmap, and you can continue adding. Actually, you could continue adding columns on so that you've got, at the start, at your outset, you've got Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4. This is the intention. And I could see very easily where you could just add Q1 of the next year, add the capabilities. You could also key this and say, I can also determine if I did successfully deliver those things. So you could use it as really um, sort of a historical document that maps your entire initiative start to finish. You could do things like say, this is our plan, and you could have iterations of this to say, okay, we're in Q2. Did we deliver what we said we were going to deliver in Q1? If we did, we can leave that there, or could we have another iteration, another version of the roadmap that is refined or revised to indicate the current roadmap versus our initial projections. There's a lot of ways that you can use this kind of thing, but the key to it is that it's at a high enough level that it's just gives people a, a a broad overview of where the project is and how it's intended to move forward. This is talking about the elements of a product roadmap. I think this is one where we kind of didn't bullet them out in the study guide, but the elements that go into a product roadmap are these terms that are, we'll just quickly highlight them here: the defined vision and strategy, defined desired outcomes, the product management team, the themes, the high-level requirements. These are all the elements that go into creating a good product map, things that need to be involved in it, and a bit of how they're intended to, or what they are. Okay. Strengths. As I said, this gives a readily visible picture of the product and the project to anyone who cares to look at it. It's relatively consumable. Some people may want to get down into the details, but this just gives a high-level picture, and as such, it's really pretty accessible to everyone. It allows your stakeholders to focus, to have a shared focus. You can look and say, if you're looking at discussing different capabilities of your product, you can look at where those capabilities are on the roadmap and say the ones that we need to be focused on are the ones that are in the shorter term. The ones that are further out, we have the luxury of saying, okay, we don't have to focus on that right now. It's not that we should ignore those downstream capabilities. We may have to be working on them. It may just be that a downstream capability that we're trying to do a couple of quarters away is so complex and so difficult that we have to be working on it now. But we can sort of orient ourselves to know how much detail we need at any given point in time based on where it falls in the product roadmap. Presents a unified view of the solution direction. Yeah, it really encompasses sort of start to finish of where we are in our product, and so it should focus us all in. By looking at the product roadmap, we should be able to see what's out of scope, what we're not going to be delivering, and based on the roadmap, it allows us to focus our discussions on options and priorities, because we can always, if a discussion comes up and we determine that a specific capability that we were intending on working on in our next release, our next iteration, turns out that we've determined for whatever reason that we don't really need it right now. We can shuffle it downstream. We can look at things and say, gee, new information that's been provided says that this capability we were considering for, 6 to 9 months from now is actually something that would be really valuable for us to implement earlier. We can move it forward in the product roadmap, and we can make those kinds of decisions and see where we are just by taking the current snapshot of the product roadmap. Limitations of product roadmaps. One of the hassles with it, and it's part of what I was saying right now, is that we can make changes to the product roadmap. We can revise things and move things around based on the current information. If that happens too often, then we're sort of wasting our time. There are probably better ways to spend their time than constantly updating the product roadmap. Updating it a little bit occasionally for different things may make sense, but you know, it's not an artifact that you want to have to spend a lot of time with. Um, the pitfall that I was thinking of that I mentioned earlier is this second bullet, is that people try to turn this product roadmap into a plan of some sort, into a predictive plan of some sort. And that is not necessarily a good thing. The idea is of the product roadmap is that it's a product strategy, which is what we intend to implement, what we think is valid at the current time with the information that we have. So if we get too hardcore about it and say, well, no, it's on the roadmap for now, and we for this particular timeline, and we can't change that, then we've gone away from being agile to being predictive, and that could be a source of problem problems. And the last bullet point is it, as I said, if you get overly detailed about it, if you don't keep it at a high level, you can spend a lot of time dealing with the product roadmap that is not necessarily valuable to your project. You can have different views of a product roadmap, different ways of looking at the product. And if you have to do that for too many different stakeholders, if it's not general enough, if it's not high level enough, you can cause yourself difficulties. Value modeling. Oops, I did that too. Get back to value model. Yeah, here. Again, we've talked a lot about value. We're consistently talking about value that is part and parcel of the whole IIBA definition of business analysis, focuses around value. Certainly in the agile environment, we're talking about consistent and rapid and incremental delivery of value. So the term value comes in all over the place. Value modeling is simply to try and identify the value that is being um, produced or generated from the perspective of a specific stakeholder or stakeholder group. So different different products will impact stakeholders differently, and each stakeholder that's involved with the product will have their own vision of the value that they're going to achieve from this solution that we're delivering. And as analysts, we need to be mindful of the those stakeholder perspectives so that we can try to not only maximize the overall value which is provided by the product, but to to the best of our capabilities, maximize the value that the individual stakeholders or the stakeholder groups will get from the solution, understanding that there are going to be times when we're going to have to say to one group of stakeholders or another, the value that you think you are supposed to be achieving from this project doesn't necessarily align with the overall value for the project. So we're mindful of that. We want to address that, but at some point, choices have to be made, and so we're those choices are being made based on what is the optimal outcome for the entire organization. Basically, interesting this little kind of equation at the back end, which is customer value is the benefits achieved by the solution offset by the cost of achieving those benefits. The other term for value modeling would be the customer value model, just a different way of basically saying the same thing. An interesting thing that I've mentioned here a couple of times in terms of value calculations. Um, the simple thing was benefits minus costs, but we also have to be talking about different types of benefits, whether this solution allows somebody to do their job better, more efficiently, more robustly, versus whether it makes people feel better or whether it improves our visibility in the marketplace to our customers. There can be many times when a solution is adopted by an organization, and one of the things about it is that the solution is going to be perceived of by the customers who are impacted by it as a real benefit or a boon, but at the same time, it makes life more difficult for the people who are having to implement the solution internally. So you've got a balancing act of benefits versus costs, where on the internal side, there's a higher cost versus the benefits, but on the external side, from the customer's perspective, the benefits are significant and they're not as concerned with the cost. So you have a balancing act that goes on in terms of doing this type of modeling, where you have to be looking at a variety of different perspectives for the solution and determining the value, the different types of value, and the overall value from different perspectives. And in terms of how to create a value model, um, you need to identify all of the stakeholders. Um, there, I mentioned already the possibility of internal stakeholders versus external stakeholders. And in terms of producing a solution, one of the stakeholders is always the delivery team, um, the people who are actually building it. So you've got um, the internal people who have to use it, the external people who are impacted by it, and the people who are basically building it and developing it. And for each of those groups, you need to identify what are their perceived and practical benefits and what are their costs for developing this solution. You put these things together and you come up with an overall picture of the value model for the particular product. Um, One of the things that was mentioned above is that the benefits for things can be perceived benefits, not necessarily things that can be tangibly measured. And so you can develop a value model which addresses benefits that are not necessarily able to be expressed quantitatively. So it's how do you how do you represent, how do you measure employee morale? You may the best that you can do on measuring employee morale may be high, medium, and low, but it's valuable to put that into a model and say, in this particular case, right now we believe that our employee morale is low, and if we do this, we're trying to get um, our employee impressions out of the low range, the morale out of the low range into the medium range. That's not something that you can really express quantitatively. It really is, we perceive that our employees are happier. Um, and that may be reflected by things like employee absenteeism, varieties of things like that that are you can measure a little bit more quantitatively, but overall what you're trying to get is a qualitative kind of assessment. So different ways you can express value models. There's a couple of them down here below. I will admit to not having seen very many of these. I think that organizations don't really do this kind of thing, and I think one of the things that is good about the focus from the analysis side on these kinds of things is that perhaps they'll become more prevalent in your organizations as you see value to them. These the last time I taught this, somebody asked me whether about these different views of value models, and I said, nah, not from my perspective. Just have not seen these. So we can take a look at these, if any of them particularly, I can't claim to being an expert on any of these. Um, I think it's just looking at it, seeing from your perspective as an analyst, does this make sense to you? Can you see where a map, something like this, would make sense to the people that you work with? Yeah, flow chart of customer values. uh, Means value chart and the value model. The value model is probably the one that resonates the most from my personal perspective because it mimics the business canvas, or models that are sort of along these lines are something that people in the analysis world have kind of latched on to, uh, creating things like this. This is very similar to a business canvas. Um, did either of you, by any chance, attend LN's seminar the other day, his webinar the other day on BA techniques? No,
No, I didn't. I got an email, but I didn't attend.
you didn't. Okay. And the reason that I ask about this is
When was
actually,
this?
it was a couple of days ago. It was probably last Wednesday or so. It was sponsored by the IIBA, and it was a webinar called Fresh Perspectives on BA Techniques. Looked at some techniques. The reason that I mention it is because one of the techniques, there was a variation on the business canvas is a technique that has gained popularity with the BA world since V3 of the Bebop came out. That was where it really was put forth, and I've seen a bunch of presentations and a bunch of things on it, and it's similar in format to this value model that's up on screen right now, in that it deals with partners, rivals, strategic values. All of the elements that are here are contained in the business canvas, and one of the things that LN did is to take a slightly different look at the business canvas, and came up with a variation on it that really, when I saw it, I looked at it and I said, "Wow, this is kind of cool. This is one of the best things I've seen come out in quite a while, because it clarified for me what was trying to be addressed by the business canvas." If you're Wow, Adaptive has posted bits and pieces of that on LinkedIn, in a couple of the different groups on LinkedIn. There's a post on it, and I'm assuming that that the webinar will be available at some point in recorded fashion if it's not already there. Um, so if you see if you see LN's webinar from the IIBA perspective, if you see LN's webinar on fresh techniques, it's worth a look, and it's from certainly my perspective, particularly worth a look for the canvas model that he's put forth. Just that it is very similar to something like this, and you know this ties back to the value modeling uh, technique in on the agile side, but it ties together with the business canvas. The value of value modeling. Um, you can, based on, particularly the examples that you had above, you can apply it at any horizon. You can start at a very high level, and you can drill down as you're into the different horizons, as long as you look at those particular aspects and say, how does this, who are our key providers at this particular horizon? They may be different than the key providers at a higher horizon or a lower horizon. Um, it's a visual technique. It tends to be a visual technique, and so you can, not have to spend an inordinate amount of time on it. Um, it focuses on your stakeholders. It focuses on what's important to them. So that's always a good thing when you're working on projects. Um, and the limitations on it, you don't want to get too far into the details. Again, models are always designed to simplify and reduce complexity. If you don't have all of those details, sometimes you can miss things. So you just need to be aware of that and say, this is what this perspective or this picture looks like from this particular perspective with this amount of detail, and we may need more detail in order to make a final decision about these things. And because there's quite a bit of information contained in these value models, um, they can get to be a bit complicated. Uh, Less so the value model map, the last one that we looked at. The other ones could be a little bit more complicated. Impact mapping. Okay. Again, clear purpose. And this is again a visual alignment with organizational goals. Um, it focuses on value creation and kind of all of the stuff that we're doing at the strategy level, or at least the bulk of the strategy level decisions and information, are looking at why we're doing things and not specifically what we're doing or how we're doing it. We want to be focusing on the why. So the impact map is actually a nice technique to do. It starts from the why. It's why are we doing what we're doing? And then we proceed down to, okay, who's going to be involved in the in whatever we're trying to do? How will they be doing what they're trying to do? And then the last piece of the impact map is what are the specific details that we need to go into? What are the specific deliverables that we need to produce in order to trace back to this? But it starts from a why and goes down. And when these what's are the specific deliverables, they should always map back up to the why. Um, we can kind of build this thing in, really it could be built in both directions. You could say somebody has told us we need to produce this. How is it going to be used? Who's going to use it? And why are they doing that? Or you can start from why are we doing something? Who's going to do it? How are they going to do it? And what are the things that they're going to need in order to be able to do it? This is a really nice little technique. The elements are what you saw in the map itself, and how to create one. Um, this says this says that you should create them top down. I would argue that that is the right way to do it. You should always be starting from your goals and then moving down into your deliverables. I think the reality is that sometime you're going to be told that, particularly if you're at a project level, you're going to be told these are the deliverables, and as an analyst, you probably want to be able to say, okay, somebody's told me that this is something that I have to build. Can I trace that back to why, so that I ultimately understand why this is why I'm creating this deliverable. Keep things visible, keep things traceable. This can be a big help in doing that. If you create it and you create it under the right circumstances, you get to, you're looking at the whys. You want to be sure that you have the whys. The what's, the features down on the bottom end are the things that will be derived from it, but they should not be the things that are driving it. It's very good at um, preventing scope creep and over engineering. Everything traces back. Everything is justified very well in terms of uh, who's going to be using it and what they're going to be doing. So that you don't get, if you can't map something back to this impact map, then you probably shouldn't be producing it. Um, because you've defined the goals and you're fulfilling the goals, it's a little bit easier to determine when you've met the goals. When if the map is drawn correctly, you can say, okay, we know that this particular deliverable needs to be produced. When we produce that, we will have achieved what we needed to do here. If a deliverable is not on the map, then you can legitimately ask and say, why is this not on this map? Should it be on this map? And if it is on the map, are we clear that it can trace back to what we need to accomplish and why? And a nice, concise picture of what's going on here. It like a good model, uh, presents a reasonable level of information with as little possible fluff or little as possible useless information. And the limitations, well, you can't do this theoretically. You really have to have, in order to understand you have to have the who's in order to understand the how's. The people who are doing these things are the ones that have to explain how they're doing things, ergo why they need specific deliverables. In order to do what they're doing. So it really does involve stakeholder collaboration, and because it's visible, and it needs to be maintained. So there's always a component of there's extra work when you're producing things that are not direct deliverables, but you need to accept that. Okay. Purpose alignment model. Purpose alignment model is one of those things that goes into my favorite 2x2 matrices. Um, they're used for a lot of different things, and it just again it allows you to do qualitative assessments, less quantitative. It allows you to bucket things at a higher level. You can get into detail on, or a little bit more detail on these things. You can extend these matrices to provide a little bit more information, but at the highest level, it's about creating buckets. In terms of purpose alignment model, we're looking at things that need to be done by the company, things that the company has to do in order to continue to operate versus things that differentiate the company in the space that you're looking at. And so you have two axes, one of which is how critical is this to the functioning of the company, and the other axis, well, the horizontal axis tends to be how critical is this to the function of the company, and the vertical axis tends to be how does this differentiate us from um, other competitors in the marketplace, and that's what we're seeking to graph here. And it really comes down to determining these four quadrants. A capability, if it's mission critical, it would fall somewhere on the right hand side of this particular matrix. These are the things that have to be done in order for our company to continue to operate. Going on the vertical axis are these things that are, you know, basically commonplace in whatever we're trying to measure, or are these things that if we do and we do well will specifically differentiate us in the marketplace and allow us to have a leg up on our competitors? And the goal, as seems to be the case normally with these 2x2s, is that the upper right hand quadrant, in this case it's the differentiating quadrant, is where you really need to focus. You need to be really interested in, these are the areas that we should be considering to invest resources, to expend resources on in order to really place ourselves in the best possible position in the marketplace. Moving down, for mission critical applications, these are things that we have to do. And if we're doing these things, we may not want to be unique or, looking for the the newest and spiffiest way to do these things. We may say these are things that we just have to be good at. So what we want to do is to say, let's find the best practices in this area. Let's implement the best practices in this area. Let's not try to be innovative here. Going on the other side for differentiators, if there is something that will differentiate us in the marketplace, but it's not something that's critical to our ability to continue to function, then maybe the way to do it is to let somebody else do it for us. You know, uh, they may be the ones who are innovating on this, and we can leverage their innovation to um, to basically help differentiate us in the marketplace without really investing any of our own resources in it. Find somebody who does it well and partner with them. And the last one, obviously, if it's not mission critical and it makes no difference in the marketplace, then why bother? If we don't have to do it and it's not going to help us, let's look at getting rid of as much of that as possible. Nice concise way of looking at things. And when I said that you can extend this a little bit, it's kind of, you're putting points on the scale here. The overall idea is to see which quadrant the points fall into, but you could look at it and say, make a little bit more specific estimates and say, for something uh, I've assessed that in terms of its criticality and its differentiation, it falls here. Something else may fall here. And so even within these quadrants, you would look at it and say, okay, well, I'm in the invest quadrant, but the things that are uh, more towards the upper right-hand corner of the quadrant are the things that I should consider more seriously, or consider, um, the possibilities of more. You can also do this instead of using points as using bubbles, where a larger bubble would indicate a higher investment, either a necessary higher investment or a desirable higher investment. So you could build a whole nice sort of bubble chart that maps all of these things out, and you can extend this. But in its basic form, it's simply about where do these items fall in the quadrants, or which quadrant do these things fall into. Okay. Strengths, it's 4 boxes basically, and yet those 4 boxes can really control strategic decisions at the corporate level, um, because it's easy to produce, because it's, unless you have argumentative stakeholders, and unless those stakeholders get very granular about it. Um, you know, if you just say all we have to do is get our whatever items we're talking about into one of these 4 quadrants, it can be done relatively straightforwardly. If you start to try and extend this, that's one of the dangers of it. If you try and get to, well, I have to know exactly where in the quadrant it falls, or how big a bubble it is, then you could run into some more problems. So you just need to be mindful of that. Um, it's you can do it at any horizon that you want. It's just a simple mapping, and it's something that, unless you get nitty gritty about it, you can do it relatively quickly. The potential downfalls on it, you need the right people in the room in order to make it happen, and you certainly can, uh, because it's a gross general kind of mapping kinds of things. You could miss some detail, and you could miss something that's important about what you're going on. You could even miss something that might move an item from one quadrant to another. So there is a little bit of that danger. You just need to be cognizant of it, and factor it into your process. Planning workshops. Planning workshops are basically all over, every project that you will ever be involved in is going to have some sort of planning process that goes on. Usually it will be done in collaboration with people. Uh, so that there's not much that needs to be here. Uh, just know that you need to do planning at the level that you're working with. If you're at a strategic level, you don't want to be doing detailed planning. In the agile environment, um, you're going to need to know these these items, in order to be able to successfully plan. I'm not going to spend time on this because I think uh, it's pretty easy to see that planning workshops are about collaboration, and they're really about making decisions that the team can agree on. Um, they're necessary at every level. Okay. And in terms of doing a workshop, the limitations are that everybody needs to dedicate the time to doing these things. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to get everybody in the room, and sometimes it's a little bit difficult to get people to agree on things. That's particularly true if you're looking where your requirements are not understood or embraced or accepted by the team. This can start to cause problems when you're trying to plan how to produce or deliver something. Minimal viable product, MVP. Hi. Uh, yep. The minimal viable product, it's a smallest set of features. In terms of agile delivery, we're always looking at delivering value to the customer in order to be able to. Oh, I
Still
lost.
can't hear you. It might just be me though.
It's breaking again.
Yep. Uh, oh. Uh, am I back now? I'm coming back.
I'm back.
Yeah, it's coming back. I don't know what that's about. I'm not sure whether that's, my ISP that is having problems dropping connections. It happens occasionally, and there's no way to predict it. It just kind of occurs. Where did I drop out? I didn't see when I dropped out. I was going into minimal viable product. I just finished up on sort of
It was
plan,
right around limitations.
the limitations on planning, yeah, planning workshops. Okay. Um, you know, uh, it's because the planning workshop involves a lot of people. It should involve all of your key stakeholders. Getting people to dedicate the time to do it is sometimes a problem. Um, Understanding what all needs to be done and doing it efficiently can be a problem because it can start to chew up time, and particularly if there's not a real clarity of understanding on what needs to be accomplished. This is probably more true at the lower horizons, the iteration horizon and the delivery horizon, than it is at the strategic horizon. But even at the strategic horizon, it can be a problem if everybody doesn't understand the organization's goals and what's trying to be accomplished. So, okay, minimal viable product. This is about delivering value to your customers, and the whole idea of agile delivery is to be delivering value in chunks. And one of the things you need to be aware of and cognizant of is what level of chunk do you have to deliver in order for it to be actually um, viable to be used by your customers. It doesn't have to be the whole product. Um, you can deliver pieces of a product, uh, different aspects. If you have a product that can be used under different circumstances, in different scenarios, if your application can apply in different scenarios, you can say, okay, based on our assessment, if my users can accomplish what they need to accomplish in for 80% of the scenarios that they have to deal with, then maybe it makes sense to deliver my product. If my if for whatever reason my users um, will not be able to successfully complete their activities um, because I haven't delivered enough functionality for them to do that, then it doesn't make sense to deliver the functionality. You need to add additional functionality so that they can actually achieve their outcomes, even if it's not the final solution, even if at some point further on down the line, you'll be adding additional functionality in order to allow them to do things better or faster. It comes down to a minimal viable product is what do they have to have in order to make it sense to make sense for them to adopt the product at all. In terms of identifying a minimal viable product, you need to understand the need that you're trying to meet, the activities that people are trying to accomplish, and then you work with saying, okay, what do I need to provide to these people in order for them to be able to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. Um, the people that are involved in this, or the elements, the target audience, you need to know who's going to be doing it. You need to know what they're trying to do. You need to know how to measure that, and you need to have some defined requirements in order to do this. So, um, in terms of delivering a minimal product, obviously you're controlling your costs. You're allowing yourself to say, is this going to work? If you're trying something new and trying something different, you don't want to expend an inordinate amount of resources only to have your customers come back and say, "Well, that's not going to work. I can't do my job that way, or I'm not interested in that product." You're better off to say, "I can give you something that you can then try and work with, and at least validate that we're moving in the right direction, and we can continue to deliver." So yep, okay. That's something that you can work on. It allows you to be more flexible and more sure about about the direction that you're going in. Um, in terms of the limitations, well, you have to do you have to do some advanced or early analysis, but you really should be doing that anyway. So I'm not sure that I would see this as a limitation of minimal viable product. Um, it is the case that since you're looking at a flexible feature set, that all you can do is take your best guess, and you may get there, you may not get there. I don't know. Um, the idea is that it's not intended to be necessarily the final product. It is only a starting point. Okay. Yeah. Real options. Yep. Real options. It's about providing information to allow you to make decisions. Things to be clear about here. These three simple rules are important rules. Options have value. Options expire, and you should never make a decision unless you know why you're making that decision. This is about deferring your decisions to the last possible moment when you have the most information and when you're actually going to act on that information. So that's keys to real options. The elements to real options are the options, so that you know what are possibilities, any commitments that you have, which will determine which options you need to adopt. You need to know when these options are no longer viable or valuable, and then you ultimately are going to need to make this decision. Strengths. The strengths of doing this is that it's really simple. You're looking at factual evidence. You're looking at facts and figures. You're using this information to make your decisions. And you're also looking at this in effectively in real time. You're only looking to make decisions where you need to make the decision and where you have the information to make the decision. Um, Limitation on it is it's not an easy thing to do. It's easier to deal with gray and fuzzy and make decisions based on gray and fuzzy. Portfolio Kanban. I mentioned this earlier, and I mentioned talking about I was talking about Kanban a bit yesterday, and it really is. This technique is about applying the Kanban idea of visualization and controlling the flow of work at a higher level, so that you're talking not necessarily about tasks, but at initiatives, strategic goals. Those are the kinds of things that you're looking at the overall environment for the entire organization, and you're basically applying Kanban type techniques of flow management to your entire portfolio. I did mention yesterday that Kanban was good at identifying bottlenecks. If there are reasons why things are not moving forward, uh, they will be apparent. The reasons may not be apparent, but it will be apparent that things are not moving forward based on your Kanban board. And then you can start to look at it and say, well, this item has been here for X number of days or X number of months, depending on which level you're at, and say, why is that the case? Um, is there a reason? Should we do something about this? Do we need to do something about this to make this happen, or is it okay that it's happening this way? So um, that's part of the value to it, because it's based on things like the work in progress rules. It's very specific. The reality is you can't fudge this. Once you establish your whip targets, if you have a whip target of 3 and you have 3 items in the column, then you can't do anything about it. You are stuck with that until it moves. You can adjust your rules, although you don't want to adjust your rules unless it's absolutely necessary. But once those rules are in place, you need to follow those rules in order for this to work. And the elements are just that you need a board. You need to know how to determine when to move items from one column on the board to another column, and you have your limits, your work in progress limits. It's very straightforward kind of thing. And then you need the items to put into the on the board. You need to understand what initiatives or what tasks or whatever are we going to put on the board. What are we going to manage with this board? Ultimately, you're going to need to have meetings to discuss these. Um, you know, the board is there for anybody to look at any point in time, but if there are things that are going on the board, then you need to be addressing them, and you're going to need a meeting to do that. And you have your impact metrics so that you can prioritize your initiatives, so that you can determine how things should be moving through the flow, and it's a visual technique. It can be done on any of the horizons. You can do this with initiatives. You can do this with tasks. You could even do this down to the delivery level with the tasks that are necessary for the development, for the members of the development team to do. They can be managed on a Kanban board. One of the things that's interesting about this is that it predicates that we do things the same way. Now that can be, at any level, there can be different ways at different levels, but you should have a consistent sort of flow for whatever activities that you're dealing with. If you have different flows for different activities, you make Kanban very difficult uh, to successfully implement because you don't know whether a thing is in this particular state or whether it's in a slightly different state because there's a slightly different flow for the activity. Value stream mapping. This is about basically producing a visual representation of the activities that are necessary for your company to derive value. It's really, I mentioned in the health insurance environment, it was about designing a product, marketing the product, enrolling members in the product, providing services to those members in the product, and paying the claims for the services that were provided. That's the value stream. In order for, as a health insurance company, in order for us to achieve value, that's what we had to do. Those were the steps that we had to take at a very high level. You could do this for almost any process. Any organization, you could map out, okay, how do we make money? How do we make money? What are those activities? And you map those things out. Um, and you make your decisions based on that the analysis of that value stream mapping. You can look at separate activities in that map and say, well, we want to focus on strategically, we want to focus on developing new products. So we pull the process for developing new products apart, and we say, what do we need to change in that process in order to make it more efficient and more robust? Uh, Value stream mappings, you can actually also use them sort of like a process flow. You can say, you can have timelines associated with a value stream map. You can have resources associated with a value stream map. And you want to be able to look at those different aspects and say, here's a part of our value stream where we're expending a whole lot of resources, and maybe if we could not expend so many resources on this particular aspect in our map, we could shift those resources to another area that would help us. So this is a high level picture that can allow you to identify those things at a very high level and address those things. You can do value stream maps in current state and in future state. This is very similar to process flows, actually. This is actually a rather complicated uh, value stream map. Uh, this is, as I said, it breaks it down into the process, the physical process of material flow, information flow, and this is your time, and you can look at any of these things and say, can you just choose to focus on one of these things? If you see a large time um, window here, you could say, gee, maybe things would be better if we could reduce this time window. Um, this is where it's critical to get product to your customers. You want to be looking at why does it take us a long time to get product to our customers? Is this something that is based on the way we process our orders? Is it our order flow? Is it our delivery flow? Is it our production? Is it that there's a lot of waiting time because we're producing things on demand and that takes more time? All those kinds of things go into decisions that you can look at based on this value stream map where you have to get from one end to the other. Okay. talks about it being more comprehensive than a process flow diagram. Clearly, when you're doing a map that looks like this, yeah, it is more comprehensive because it's talking about material, information, and time. It doesn't have to be. You can do very simple value stream mapping that just says, these are the processes that I have to go through, and then say, I want to do more analysis. I want to drill into it more, and these are the kinds of the information and the time are things that I want to do analysis on. So that's you know it's a flexible technique in that sense. If you're doing a full hardcore value stream map according to this diagram above, it is a bit more difficult to put together. Um, but again, you can do a simple version that just takes, provides the high level, basically the highest level value flow, and then derive from that. Okay, that covers pretty much the techniques, the agile techniques for the strategy horizon. I know you guys, Tomo, you said you wanted to try and clear us an hour early. We cleared it at about 25 minutes early, unless you guys have any other questions or any thoughts that you want to discuss before we close out for the day.
I don't have any questions
You're
actually.
good?
I'm familiar with a little bit of the concepts of value map.
Okay.
I'm good to go. Thank you
Because I
so much.
did that quite a bit. Yeah.
Okay. So you're good. Leon,
All right.
any
Thank you so much.
I'm all set. I'll see you next week. Thanks again.
Okay, thank you both. I hope you have a great week, and we will see you next weekend, where we'll take up initiative and delivery horizons. Okay. If you have any questions,
All right.
you guys should have my email address. If you have any questions, just so that you know, it's tom@adaptiveprocesses.com. Um,
Okay.
if you have any questions and you want to reach out to me in advance, please feel free. And you can also, I didn't say this at the beginning, but you certainly can and should look me up on LinkedIn. You can connect with me on LinkedIn,
Yeah.
and you can
I'm
use that
already
as a,
connected with you.
yep, okay.
What's your last name again?
Tomasovic.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I remember. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thanks, guys. I'll see you
All
next week. Yep.
All right.
right.
Bye.